8-minute video. We're just going to quickly go through this one more time.
Here's a story you might not have heard. In 1946, President Harry Truman created a commission to make recommendations for how to reform higher education. After doing extensive research, the commission released a 6-volume report arguing that higher education was becoming increasingly
Wait, why does this dude sound like young John Benjamin?
important and should be accessible to everyone, regardless of age, background, or ability to pay. As a first step, the Truman Commission proposed making freshman and sophomore year of college totally free at public universities. The commission also recommended offering grants to fully cover living expenses for students who needed them, and it recommended providing all of this on an inclusive basis, dismantling racial and religious exclusion, increasing women's enrollment, and creating more flexible admission standards to account for economic disadvantages. And that was all just supposed to be a first step. How did they propose to pay for this? The commission found that the phenomenal increases in productivity per worker from technology would generate enough social surplus to support education at all levels far more adequately in the future than we could in the past. That is, so long as we made education a collective priority. And then, Congress implemented the commission's recommendations, and college has been affordable to everybody who wants to attend ever since. Okay, that last part isn't true. Actually, it's just the opposite today. America is drowning in student debt, $1.7 trillion of it, and growing. It's hard to imagine a presidential commission making the types of recommendations that the Truman Commission did, even though we live in a much wealthier, more integrated, and more technologically advanced society. What happened? Well, the Truman Commission was right that productivity would continue to increase, but we did not make education a collective priority. Or, more accurately, political elites who were worried that too much education would lead to too much equality didn't make it a priority. So, the growing wealth created by increased productivity went toward making the rich richer and not into educating more people. To see how this happened, we have to go back to the end.
That's why all the anti-education Andes are like, especially if you're on the left, you're literally cucking yourself, man. You're like, what are you saying? You're advocating for the same things that like right-wingers have advocated for, capital owners have advocated for decades, for centuries. You literally do not want a educated working class. You are advocating against the working class when you say that.
End of the Second World War. That was the first time many middle-class people started to go to college. Because of a federal law called the GI Bill, veterans, a huge percentage of the population back then, could even attend college for free. Because of state-level commitments to education, public college was cheap and accessible for massive numbers of people beyond veterans too. There were still deep inequalities, but college was no longer just a training ground for the rich. With universities opening to more people, feminists and the civil rights movement began to break down barriers. The increasing presence of working-class people, women, and people of color on college campuses made them centers for political and social dissent. Protest, debate, and activism became part of college life. Soon there was a backlash. Some politicians thought this was too much free speech from the wrong type of people. They wanted a return to the old system. A candidate for California governor named Ronald Reagan started attacking people he called campus radicals. In the year 1970, an advisor to Reagan declared in a speech, "We are in danger of producing an educated proletariat. That's dynamite. We have to be selective on who we allow to go through higher education." When these politicians gained power, they made sharp cuts to education funding. California, under Reagan,
Like, they openly stated it. They openly said it. I read the quote earlier today. They straight up said, if there are more educated people, they're going to be harder to fucking own. They're going to be harder to dominate. We need to go back to a classist disparity in terms of education, which is statistically, empirically proven to be the number one driver of upward social mobility. That's it. If you want any kind of social mobility, okay, even if we're going to move beyond like, class dynamics, if you're going to think about it from a capitalist framework, within the confines of a capitalist framework, the number one fucking, the number one way of having any semblance of upward social mobility is through education, higher education specifically. And they knew that. They recognized it, but they wanted to shut it off. They wanted to recreate the same disparities that only wealthy people can get the education. They already kind of have that with competition. They have it with the real affirmative action, not the one that everybody fucking complains about. because they think that like black people are able to get into colleges. But the real affirmative action, which is legacy admissions. Oh, your pappy went there. Your dad's dad went there. Your dad bought the wing of the fucking Harvard library. So now you can go there too. That is the real problem. That is a reinforcement of the prior intergenerational wealth and wealth disparity that exists in the United States of America.
Reagan's influence went from funding 32% of the University of California budget in 1974 to just 16% in 2004. Elsewhere, cuts to education were justified on the logic of living within our means. President Gerald Ford criticized New York City's CUNY system for offering a program where any high school graduate, rich or poor, could attend without paying tuition. Imagine that. In the midst of a city budget crisis in 1976, Wall Street bond investors forced CUNY to charge tuition for the first time. While politicians were slashing funding, business strategies to undermine working class power restructured industry in a way that redirected income toward jobs in management and finance and away from everyone else. The jobs that paid well required college degrees, and that meant that, even as education funding collapsed, the number of people entering college continued to increase. So, incomes for most people were starting to stagnate, and higher education was becoming more important and getting a job that paid well.
This is Andrew Tate if he never gave up on his hairline and he never moved to Luton. An actual top G. No weird fucking fake British accent. Still firmly believing and holding on to the remnants of his hairline.
Well, so more and more people were going to college. Meanwhile, because of an ideology of false scarcity, state funding was not keeping up. What filled the gap? Student loans. Student loans are actually a creation of the federal government. They were created on the assumption that states would mostly cover the cost of college. So federal loans would be for a relatively small number of people, paid off painlessly within a few years of graduating. But as tuition climbed and state grants receded, a whole industry developed around student lending. By the 1990s, massive student loans were the norm, and colleges began to base their business models around them. Fast forward to today, and the results have been catastrophic.
By the way, this is why I get so fucking mad at piece of shit right-wingers who say correctly that colleges will just raise the prices anyway. It's like, bro, that's why some of these fucking Band-Aid solutions, like Obamacare, end up working as a wealth transfer back to the same fucking villains, dude. It's the same exact principle. If you consistently only have a market-based approach to solutions that require you to do a little bit of socialism, just a baby bit, okay? I'm not talking like redistributing the means or redistributing all profits or seizing the means of production socialism, the real socialism, but like what Americans understand as socialism, socialization, okay? Just a little bit. If you don't do that, the same entities that have caused this fucking problem are going to continue causing it, okay? It's just wild. Like, that's why they're correct when people say stuff like, you know, this is going to cause college campuses to increase tuition or whatever. Like, they're not wrong. But that's an individual problem that also needs to be fucking solved.
5 million Americans.
But for some reason, because we have capitalism brain, there is no way to fucking put the toothpaste back in the tube. You're like, nope, we squeezed it. Permanent growth. That's the only model. God forbid we institute price checks. No, that's why the only solution always is to lower the money supply and try to force the working class to have less money so they can fucking have less purchasing power. It's never to increase supply. It's never to implement price regulation. It's never to implement price checks. It's never to punish colleges, at least, with further burdensome taxes if they are not going to abide by new standards in pricing.
Have student loans, and each graduating class owes more than the last. In 1980, there were only a few $1 million of student loans. By 2000, that number was around 50 billion. In 2010, 200 billion. And today, we have nearly $2 trillion outstanding. Instead of starting a family or buying a car, let alone starting a business or starting a movement, young people today live with a sword of debt hanging over their head. Student debt is even causing many older people to put off retirement. Things are so bad that 1 in 15 student borrowers has considered suicide because of it. Too many lives are being ruined. And here is the craziest part. All of that student debt doesn't have to exist. I'm not saying that in a hypothetical way. I'm saying that if the President of the United States wanted, he could wipe out almost all student debt right now. You see, 95% of student debt is owed to the Federal Department of Education. And when Congress created the student loan program, it gave the Secretary of Education authority to compromise, waive, or release, or modify any federal student loan debt for any reason. This is often called settlement authority. Now, the settlement authority has never been used to bring about broad cancellation, but I've done a deep review of the relevant case law, and the legal argument for it is very strong. In fact, after I wrote a law review article that made the case, a growing number of senators have been convinced and began to advocate for the Department of Education to cancel student debt. Few things are certain in law, but clearly the case is good enough that it's at least worth a test. Think about it. Canceling federal student loans would instantly make tens of millions of people's lives better. Its benefits would flow to their families and their communities and help stimulate the broader economy. But canceling student loan debt is only the first step toward building a higher education system that works for all. If we care about living in a democratic society, we should use our enormous wealth to invest in making it possible for anyone to access all the education they want. Certainly, we should not condemn people to a lifetime of debt for wanting to learn or better themselves. All of this was clear to a presidential commission in 1946. It's well past time to recover that vision and to build on it. I'm Luke Herron, PhD student at Yale Law School for the Gravel Institute.
What would happen to all student loan debt if the Department of Education was abolished? Would the Republicans do exactly what they're screeching about currently? No. When a Republican or a Democrat runs on abolishing a federal agency or an institution or whatever, their solution almost always is to have it restructured within a private corporation. When do colleges start raising tuition by $10K? 30 years ago. Yeah, exactly. Every year.